the thing about it is that resilience is a quality that when you practice the teachings consistently, resilience is a quality that begins to appear. And so what I mean by that is that when something happens, there is a reaction. And for someone who's practiced, someone who has gotten down the path a bit in terms of being able to be present, that when something happens that triggers a reaction, it spikes, but after it spikes, it returns to normal much faster for somebody who's practiced, right? For somebody who's not practiced, it spikes, and then there's a reverb, there's a reverberation in thinking. You know, oh, why did that happen? I hope that doesn't happen again. And there's a story that gets told about it, and you know, on and on and on. And the fact of the matter is, there are things that happen in our lives. Sometimes, for example, in relationship to people in our family or people that are close to us, or business associates or whatever, there are things that happen in people's lives that they don't get over for the rest of their life, right? So that's how not resilient it can happen for people. And of course, you know, when you learn these teachings and practice these practices, part of the learning is to understand what it costs you for that to be the case. That it costs you your life, it costs you your energy for that to be the case. And so, because that's so, you know, you then have an intention for the practice to be valued and to be done consistently, and then you have an intention for the understandings to continue to deepen through your reading or watching videos or attending retreats or whatever the case may be. So that you can stay motivated and you can stay in this work, in this process. It's also the case that in brain science research, they also found that monks that had thousands and thousands of years of meditation practice, when they were in research where they were given an abrupt stimulation, right? Something that would cause a reaction, right? I think one of the ways they did that is they touched the hand of the monk with something that's hot, not enough to burn them, but it was an unexpected change in temperature that would have been a reaction. And what they discovered was the monk's reaction was stronger than the average person, but it ended much faster than the average person, right? And so the intensity of the reaction is because of the degree of sensitivity that's there, right? Yeah, the more awake you are, the more alive you are, the more sensitive you are, the more you feel, right? And so that's just part of the picture in terms of what changes when you do these practices and you develop these understandings. But the other thing about all this that I think is important is that, you know, we practice meditation together, we talk about the teachings together, you do whatever you do in your life as far as taking time every day to add something to this process of learning that you're in, taking time every day to practice meditation and so forth. But then in between those periods when you're giving energy to developing your understanding further, or when you're giving energy to practicing meditation, in between those times you're living life. You know, you're living your life. And the most powerful way that I know to get the experience that's possible, you know, whether we're talking about the quality of your life as far as being happy is concerned, or whether we're talking about your ability to function efficiently in life instead of being caught up in reactions and being caught up in a lot of mental states that don't really do anything but waste energy and cause destructive consequences. And so the thing is this, there's really three pieces to this if you really want to get the possibility. One is to do the practice of meditation. The other is to be a student of the teachings, right? And to consistently seek to deepen your understanding of things. But then the third one is to practice in your life. And that is just as important as the other two, to practice in your life. So as you go through any given day, if you're like me, and I assert you are like me, like you're human, right? And you've got conditioning to deal with, right? That in any given day in your life, from the time you wake up until the time you go to sleep, there is a constant reality in which there are what I would call mini upsets, right? There are big upsets in life too, and you don't know when they're going to come, right? But then there's also mini upsets, they're the little stuff, that you go to shovel your walk when it snows and the snow shovel breaks in half. The stuff that you go all shucks, the stuff that you may not just go all shucks about, right? That you may do things cursed a little more than just all shucks. So that's when you're in your life. That's when what you're practicing and what you're learning is either serving you or it's not serving you. That's where you'll find out if it's serving you. That's where you can come up with questions, right? In terms of, well, this happened and so if you practice on the little stuff, if you pay attention and practice on the little stuff, right? Then you're developing the ability to go to the experience of your true nature when the big shit hits the fan. So you could say, given what we're dealing with here and given the conditioning that you're dealing with and the condition that you start with when you begin this practice, right? Nothing short of a consistent practice every day, every moment is necessary in order for you to come out of the trance. You're in a trance in order for you to come out of the trance, right? In Japan, I don't know where I heard this recently, I don't know where I heard it, but in Japan, when someone's sentenced to death, right, the way they carry out the sentence, right, so when you're sentenced to death, you're put in kind of a special, cell block or something, for the people who are sentenced to death. And you don't have a execution date in Japan. They just come and knock on your door and say, today's the day, right? So how would that be for you, right? What would that be like for you if you were sentenced to death, right, and you didn't know when your execution was going to take place until you heard the knock on the door and then it was going to take place now, right now, right? What would that be like, right? So my point is you are in that situation. You are in that situation. Yeah. And the reason that I think it's important to visit that, right, to touch that, right, is because you need to touch those realities in order to motivate yourself, right, to do what you need to do to be awake and to deal with the inevitables. Obviously, death is inevitable, right, to deal with the inevitables. And you don't wait to deal with the inevitables. You don't hide your death and wait till it comes. You don't turn away from death and wait till it comes. No, the wisdom teachings say, no, you look at death all the time. Back in the day when I was studying Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan, for those of you who are old enough and were a hippie back in the 60s, you might have saw that series of books, right? But one of the things this Mexican sorcerer told the student that came to him who was trying to learn about these things, he said, I live every day with death as my advisor sitting on my shoulder. I live every day with death as my advisor sitting on my shoulder, right? So this is a way of expressing the idea that I maintain a constant awareness of my death, constant awareness of my death. And the constant awareness of your death is not morose, no. The way that works is it really stimulates your sense of aliveness, right? Because you're not dead now, right? Death may be something that's inevitable, but it's not happening now, right? Therefore, are you going to experience what is happening now with some kind of appreciation, right? That this is temporary, right? See, because impermanence has two sides, right? One side of impermanence is that nothing lasts forever. You know what I mean? So you can't hold on to good experiences, right? And sometimes you can't get rid of bad experiences, right? So that's the bad side of impermanence. But the good side of impermanence is that it's impermanent. Not, this too shall pass, right? So it's impermanence in and of itself isn't good or bad. It's the way you're relating to it that determines, how it is for you when it comes to impermanence. One of the things that I found to be the case in my life that works, at some point, and I think this is inevitable if you continue to learn these teachings and practice these practices, at some point it becomes apparent that your entire life ever only exists in the present moment, right? Your entire life ever only exists in the present moment, right? And so what becomes evident is, okay, so face the whole thing, right? Face your whole life at once, Don't wait for the inevitables. Face the whole thing at once. Face your birth, face your past, face the present moment, face your fears, face your death, face your insecurity, face your uncertainty, face your anxiety about not knowing what's going to happen. Face the whole thing at once. Face your life all at once. And you can do this when you're sitting in meditation, you know what I mean? Just relax yourself and let yourself be present to your life. Let yourself be present to your whole life. Not just the life that's past, not just the life that's happening now, and not just the life that's going to happen, but the whole thing. Be present to the whole thing. And whatever there is about the whole thing, right? Whatever feelings you have about the past, right? Be aware of those feelings, right? Connect with those feelings. Whatever feelings you have about the future, be aware of those feelings. Connect with those feelings. Face death now. Face your death. Because if it's true, and this is something you can't grasp with your mind, but yet they tell us it's true, and it does make sense, and it's been accepted as being scientifically true by quantum physicists, right? Is that time is not real. There is no real time, right? There is no real time, right? The mind uses time to deal with eternity, right? Eternity is an incomprehensible reality, right? So in order to manage that, right, the mind takes eternity and turns it into time. Turns it into a linear process that's consistent with the way thinking occurs, so you can manage time, right? But the reality of it is that there is no such thing as time, and what the implication of this is, and this is the part that don't try and figure it out, right? That you've died. You've already died. If there's no time, and it is true that the past and the future and the present are all happening at the same time, right? You were born and you died already, right? That's the reality of it, right? But because your mind is processing everything in a linear fashion to make it, something that you can manage, right? Then you put your death in the future, right? And you deal with it in the future, and you put what's happened in the past, right? You can face the whole thing because the whole thing is happening right now. And that's not a theory, that's reality. The whole thing is happening right now. And if you do succeed in facing the whole thing, if you do deal with it in terms of not running away and feeling whatever comes up in your body, right? And dealing with whatever there is to deal with about the whole thing, including who you are, right? As a body or as awareness, right? If you do deal with it that way, then you'll start to notice that as you live your life on a daily basis, right? And things come that are unexpected, right? They don't really move you off your grounding. They don't really shake you, They don't really get you stuck. You're able to keep moving and deal with the things as they happen, right? And the way you'll know this, and the way you'll know if that's the way it is, that you're doing your work, right? You're doing the practices, you're learning what you need to learn, right? Is that as you go through the day, there is a quality elevation, right? The quality of your life is higher, right? You're not as upset, you're not as disturbed, you're not depressed, things start to even out, things start to get quieter, things start to get calmer, and as things arise, you're able to deal with them and move on without it carrying to the end of the day. If that's not the case, then by the end of the day, if you're a person who's highly reactive, right, by the end of the day, you're miserable. And then you get to, if you listen to people, you can hear this, right? Then you get to go to sleep and wake up and do the whole thing again tomorrow, right? And it's guaranteed to suck, right? It's guaranteed to suck because all the little upsets build up to be life sucks, right? All the little upsets build up to be life sucks, right? And the reason we're here is because it's not that that's true. No, it's that that's the condition that you're in when you don't know how to get out of identifying yourself with a physical body and a personality. One of the things you can be certain of is that if you spend a lot of time upset, right, that you're spending a lot of time being a person. If you're spending a lot of time upset, then you're spending a lot of time being the one who you were conditioned and learned to be. That's who you're being. You're being that one if you spend a lot of time upset, right? Because part of that is the idea that you're separate from other people, right? This is the duality. This is the duality, right? You're separate from other people, right? So that's dual, subject and object, right? You're separate from life, subject and object, right? And once that's the case, and once you're in the body, and once you have the personality and the story and the personal history, it's a setup. It's a setup, right? Out of that condition, there has to come the kind of suffering that we see in the world. There has to come the kind of suffering that we see in the world. It's inevitable. And it's not a matter of people being inherently evil. No, it's just a matter of that's the condition that we find ourselves in. And if you don't know anything but that condition, then what people do in that condition makes sense. If you don't know anything but that condition, then killing each other makes sense. It does, right? Because it's a me or you world, right? It's a me or you world. If there's not enough to go around, right, then either me or you are going to get it, and push is going to come to shove, right? That's the way the world is today. Look at the news, right? And one of my teachers used to say that what we have to do if we're ever going to get out of this and into a different experience of our lives, it has to go from a you or me world to a you and me world. You or me to you and me, right? And the way it would go to a you and me world is that through the work that we're doing and the practices and the teachings that you're studying, right? You're learning that you and other people are the same. You are the same. There is no separation. You're not separate from other people. You're learning that you're not separate from life. This is non-duality. You're learning that if you subtract the conditioning, if you subtract the belief, if you subtract the operational reality that you're separate from the world, right? And if you subtract the idea that you as a person is real and the person is not real and doesn't actually exist, right? So you subtract that, right? It was the person separate from other people, right? It was the person separate from life. But if through the study and through the practice you come to see and learn and get it into your bones that this idea that you have of yourself as a person does not actually exist, right? So you can take that out of the picture now, right? And then what's left? If that's out of the picture, what's left? Is there duality? No, because if that's out of the picture, there's no subject and object anymore, right? That's non-dual, right? Which means, what's that?
It's a kind of freedom now.
Well, of course it's a kind of freedom because there's nobody to suffer. Yeah. So you and the world are the same thing. You and other people are the same thing. You and what looked like wasn't you is you, right? There is no not you anymore, right? Therefore, things that people say who experience this make sense. When you experience being enlightened, you have no enemies. How can you have enemies? It's impossible to have enemies because you are those people, right? It's impossible to be at odds with life because you are life. You are life. You are actually life. When you have this experience of that there is an end to where your body is, an end to the limit of your body and a beginning to what's not your body, right? It is possible if you do the work and you do the studying and you develop a different way of perceiving things where you can see that that's artificial. There is no end from your body to the world. Your body and the world are the same thing, right? They are interdependent, aren't they? Aren't you interacting with the world all the time? You're breathing it in and exhaling it out. You're part of the world. You know, you are the world. Remember that, you know, about 30 years ago, they had that thing, we are the world, right? Yeah. You know, people were going around singing that, right? But I doubt they really understood that it's actually true. It's actually true. And if you experience that, that's different from the concept, right? That's different from the concept. And so what you want to do, the first step when people learn about the truth, it's conceptual. You know, you learn about it conceptually, right? But then obviously that conceptual understanding has to move into an experiential understanding. You have to experience who you are. That's why I keep harping on the idea. If you have not yet seen yourself, if you have not yet recognized your awareness, please take some time and do that. Pay attention to the awareness. Just notice that awareness is happening. It's real, it's happening, right? And notice that there's no distance between you and that awareness that's happening. Please do that, because the first step has to be that you have an experiential, right? An experiential understanding of your true nature, right? An experiential understanding of the awareness that is you, that you've experienced that to be true. That's a different thing than having a concept about it. And having experienced it, then that awareness that you know to be yourself can actively be involved in the experience of your life, right? Before you knew it was you, it wasn't there, right? It was just you, the personality, you, the physical body, and you, the conditioning, right? Which is the understanding you have about what's real and the whole 9 yards, right? Yeah, but when you see the truth of yourself as awareness itself, now that awareness is in the game. Now, when you are practicing meditation and you practice being aware of the body breathing, right? The awareness is there, alive and real, and it's making contact with the physical body and the breath, right? And inherent to that direct experience is the experience that you are not the body. Inherent to that. Right? Because it's impossible to be aware of something if you're that something. That's why the experience of who you are is so challenging, right? Because you can't see it, right? Because you're it. You're looking from it, right? That's that old St. Francis saying, right? What you're looking for is what's looking. Yeah, you can't see who you are because you're looking from there, right? But you can see your body. And if you can see your body, that must not be you. You're not looking from the body, you're seeing the body. And when you practice meditation, you're practicing having direct experience of that being the case. And that information is flowing back to the mind and flowing back to the brain. And so it is reorganizing the brain and the mind to be consistent with what's real, which is that you are not the body. So that's what comes out of it. And obviously, in order for that to be an experiential truth that you're living your life with, right? You've got to practice it You've got to practice it. You've got to practice it in terms of having an intention, an ongoing, alive, awake intention, right? To be awake and aware and be observing the witness. We talked about that here, observing, right? To be the observing witness, and you have to have an intention to be the observing witness so you can watch in real time how the conditioning keeps taking over. That's the ultimate practice, right? Watch in real time how the conditioning keeps taking over. And when you're watching it in real time, you can intervene. When you're watching it in real time, an upset begins to occur, and if you're paying attention and you see the upset beginning to occur, right? You don't have to continue with it. You can intervene at that point, right? It seems to me that there's a critical point there, right? That once you are identified with what you're thinking when you're upset and what you're feeling when you're upset, once you're identified with it, it's over. It's over, isn't it? Yeah, then you're the person who's upset, right? And the whole thing comes in and it's all real, right? And the energy of it is operating you. It's determining what you say and do, right? Like that, right? So you've got to practice paying attention, right? So that you can catch it when it starts to go off, right? So that you can see it. You can see the upset occurring. You're aware of the thoughts that are involved in the upset. You're aware of the emotions that are involved in the upset. And when that energy goes off and you start to go into an upset, right? You can intervene. You can stop identifying with it. You can stop believing you're the thinker of your thoughts. You can stop noticing thoughts not like you're thinking them, they're happening to you. You can notice emotions not like you're feeling them, no, they're just happening. And they're not even happening to you, they're just happening, right? The idea that they're happening to you is part of the conditioned experience that you're having. You're letting things happen the way they are, but they're not running you. You're having the feelings you're having, but they're not running you. They're not causing you to behave. You're having the thoughts you're having, but they're not causing you to say anything, right? That's when you're moving out of the conditioning operating what's going on. That's a huge thing. That's a big deal. That's coming away. That means you're waking up. That means you're present to your life. That means you're present to your life, and because you're present to your life, you're no longer going to allow the machinery, to run your life. And the reason that work is so important is because it helps you to understand that what you're doing makes sense. What you're doing is intelligent. What you're doing is wisdom. Why? Because as you mentioned, if somebody does something to you, right? If you understand what Balsekar is talking about, there is nobody doing something to you. That's an illusion. There is nobody doing something to you, right? And what's operating the situation is neither you or them, right? But the source. The source. So keep practicing. Look, here's what I want to leave you with today, right? Please understand that the formal practice that you do will have failed unless that starts to become what you're doing all the time. The formal practice you're doing will have failed unless it's what you start to do all the time, because it's not enough. It's not enough. You can't be awake and know who you are for 30 minutes and then the other 23 and a half hours, right? Be back in the shit. That's not going to work. You're preparing. When you practice meditation, you're preparing to be awake. You're preparing to be alive. You're preparing to stay present when you're not practicing meditation, and pay attention when you're not practicing meditation to the thought activity, right? But now it's a little more complicated than in meditation, because when you're practicing meditation, you're moving attention from the thinking activity to the breath. It doesn't matter what the thinking activity is. You're practicing moving it to the breath, right? In life, it does matter what the thinking activity is. So now you have to pay attention, right? And notice what the content of the thinking is, right? Because sometimes it's practical. Sometimes it's not, causing you to suffer, right? But sometimes it is. And according to the brain scientists, it's about 70%. They say about 70% of your mental activity is mind wandering every day, right? That means 70% of the time you're sleeping. 70% of the time the machine's running, right? And there's nobody home. The machine's just running, right? But if you start paying attention, when that starts to happen, right, you move your attention out of that. Because all that does, when you're in that state of mind wandering, right, all that does is perpetuate the life of the person. That's all that does. It just perpetuates the story, perpetuates the life of the person, right? As you think about things and become even crazier, right? So if you understand that, then your intention has to be, as soon as you notice that's the case, bring it back. You know, most of the planes that fly, right? Well, not most, all planes that fly from one destination to the next are off course 95% of the time. Are off course. So the plane has to keep, right? The plane has to keep adjusting, right, where it's going. That's the way you have to live your life. You have to pay attention in such a way where in the course of the day, you'll see your life start to veer off, right, from the direction that you headed in when you woke up in the morning. You'll see it start to veer off, right? And when it veers off, you correct the heading. You make a correction. You bring it back. You bring it back to where you are. But unless you're conscious enough and awake enough, unless you've been practicing this, no chance. No chance.